G'day, listeners. You are tuned into the Natives Rouseabout podcast, the official podcast of the Australian Natives Association. And if you are tuning in as this has dropped, a very happy Australia Day to you. In fact, a very happy Australia Month to you. That is going to be the focus of this show. My name is Mitch. I'm jumping into the hot seat tonight for Michael, who's taking a well-earned break. So a shout out to you, Mick, on all your wonderful work. You've left some rather large blundstones for me to try to fill. I'm going to give it a red hot crack tonight and see how I go. So joining me on the panel tonight, we have a regular contributor to the show in Thomas from Victoria. G'day, Thomas. How you going?
Yeah, good. Trying to survive this heat.
It has been a little rough over the last few days. I think we had a pretty good day down here today. So relief, is not just on the way. It's here and hopefully staying here for a little while longer. I'm sure we'll get another spike with February ahead of us. But also joining me on the panel tonight, I'll have to make sure, Thomas, that I avoid that very Australian temptation to abbreviate to Tom, because I'm going to have to reserve that for the other member of tonight's panel who joins us from Sydney for the very first time. Tom. G'day, Tom. How are things going with one of our very newest Australian Natives Association branches there up north?
Yeah, things are going great. I mean, we're dealing with the heat here too. Seems to be a countrywide thing. I think we would have learned that by now. It's a hot place.
Yes, indeed. Anyway, very good. Wonderful to have you guys on tonight. As mentioned, this is going to be a podcast about Australia Day and Australia Month more broadly. So we'll get stuck into that shortly. First up, though, just in case you happen to stumble across this podcast without going directly through any of our channels, I'm not sure that's possible, but let's say that it is. Let's just give a bit of a plug for ourselves and what we're all about. The Australian Natives Association, one of Australia's leading nationalist organisations, we believe Australia's leading nationalist organisation, in fact, dedicated to advancing the legitimate ethnic interests of native-born descendants of the Australian founding stock and other loyal and naturalised European descent settlers who call Australia their native land and treat it as such. We aim to build and secure the foundational and institutional infrastructure needed to publicly advance our interests and to guarantee a future for our people. We now have branches in Brisbane, Canberra, Hobart, Melbourne and Sydney. That was in alphabetical order, just in case you guys were thinking that might be in order of supremacy or superiority. But we also welcome associate members from outside those areas. So if you're interested in joining or finding out more, visit oznatives.org, or you can find us on X, Instagram and Telegram. Now, it is customary to begin our show with a response to any comments that have been made on the previous edition of the podcast. We did have a comment that was left in response to the Menzies and Churchill podcast. I'm reliably informed that this question has been answered already, but given there are no other comments, we can answer it again for the relevant listener, Hengist and Horser 88, good name. Who asks, what is the ANA's stance on the Anglosphere? Does the association want closer ties like freedom and movement and military coordination or more distance? Thomas, you had a few things to say on this, I believe.
Yeah, so obviously, as Mitch was just saying, we did do a podcast on this called the Empire Day podcast, where we had some guests in from other associations in Canada and the UK. But in short, while there are varying opinions on the extent of positive feelings and policy, that is the direction that we're coming from. Most members cluster around we would love to support and be supported by our closest blood around the world, while as nativists, we would still, of course, want to exist as our own recognisable nation and culture. However, the governments in control of that closest blood at the moment are not allies to the Australian people at the moment. The same is true for Australia, which currently makes this a very theoretical question.
Yeah, well said. I tend to agree, and I'll weigh into that in a second. Tom, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, pretty similar thoughts, that it's nice in theory, but it's not really possible in practice at the moment, so it's kind of hard to really think about. It'd be nice to have more ties with the former empire countries, but if it's going to be freedom of movement, that's pretty tough. You're going to probably end up with a lot of EU issues where people come in to the easiest visa to get to the other ones.
Yeah, and the fact is that we no longer have a common cultural heritage or even ethnic or racial heritage necessarily with the people occupying these lands. Many we do, many we don't, because of the immigration policies across these countries, which in some instances have gotten them to a far worse position than what we are. So the idea of freedom of movement between other countries in the quote-unquote Anglosphere puts us in a very vulnerable position indeed. Nonetheless, I think where we can look to foster positive relationships and work productively and collaboratively is with other nationalist or nativist type groups within these countries. And recently I was a guest on the Old Glory Club podcast over in the US, and those sorts of collaborations in the future are something that I certainly hope we can continue to develop. Check them out, by the way, Old Glory Club. Very good stuff. All right, so we move on to our second regular segment, which is a poem. And we generally try to keep this pretty topical, and I've tried to do that today. We've just had Australia Day. This is a poem that is sometimes recognised as the very first Australian poem. That's a pretty loose classification, calling this the first Australian poem, because it's the first poem written about Australia, but it was not written in Australia, or indeed even by a man who ever set foot in Australia at all. It was written by Erasmus Darwin, a name that some of you may recognise as being the grandfather of Charles Darwin, who did indeed visit the shores of Australia. But this, I suppose, is a vision that Erasmus Darwin has concocted of that first visit to Sydney Cove, the landing at Port Jackson in 1788. And the poem is called The Visit of Hope to Sydney Cove near Botany Bay. Where Sydney Cove her lucid bosom swells, and with wide arms the indignant storm repels, high on a rock amid the troubled air, Hope stood sublime and waved her golden hair. Calmed with her rosy smile the tossing deep, and with sweet accents charmed the winds to sleep. To each wild plain she stretched her snowy hand, high waving wood and sea encircled strand. Hear me, she cried, ye rising realms, record time's opening scenes and truth's prophetic word. There shall broad streets their stately walls extend, the circus widen and the crescent bend. There, rayed from cities o'er the cultured land, shall bright canals and solid roads expand. There the proud arch, Colossus-like, bestride yon glittering streams and bound the chasing tide. Embellished villas crown the landscape scene, farms wave with gold and orchards blush between. There shall tall spires and dome-capped towers ascend, and piers and quays their massy structures blend, while with each breeze approaching vessels glide and northern treasures dance on every tide. There ceased the nymph, tumultuous echoes roar, and joy's loud voice was heard from shore to shore. Her graceful steps descending pressed the plain, and peace and art and labour joined her train. Initial thoughts, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Thomas.
Very romantic, very optimistic about the future of the country.
Indeed. Tom, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, pretty similar thoughts. I had read the poem, but I didn't even know that he hadn't visited Australia, because it sounds like he had. Just with the language, it's too descriptive.
Yeah, well, it's written in 1789, so I'm not so. I mean, it's certainly vividly, rich in its description, but I personally am not sure how convincing it is, because if he had have come upon the scene of the first settlers at Sydney Cove in 1789, I think he would have encountered a pretty miserable sight, would Erasmus Darwin. Things were not going particularly well then. It wasn't until about 1792 that they were finally able to establish a stable food supply, and things were pretty desperate until then. But You're certainly right, Thomas, that there is a romanticism to it, that budding romanticism. This was really as the Romantic movement was about to kick off, and although there are neoclassical elements there, at the risk of getting too technical here, with the heroic couplets, the structure is a little bit looser, still very stately and grand in a way that is at odds with the more relaxed kind of style of 20th century Australian poetry, that Federation era poetry. But for the standards of the day, playing with the formula a little bit more in a way that would come to define that Romantic era and that outpouring of emotion. And yes, it is a very positive vision, which probably matched the vision that Arthur Phillip had in mind, but was not necessarily the vision that his betters had in England. Phillip didn't want the convicts to be the foundation of the new colony, and he wasn't quite aware of how determined the powers that be back home were that would be the case. But I think it makes the occasion of Australia Day and what we celebrate, because of where we came from and how difficult it was and how at odds with that initial vision it was. It makes it so worthwhile for that very reason.
Australia could easily have been a very, very different sort of country if the right men weren't in charge at the right time. Easily could have ended up as a glorified plantation for slave owners, another worse version of the American South.
Absolutely.
From coolies all over the place. So, thank God for our founding fathers.
I am an Arthur Phillip admirer, as you know, Thomas. So, yes, but that is Visit of Hope to Sydney Cove near Botany Bay by Erasmus Darwin. All right, so we move on to the focus of this episode, which is Australia Month. And by way of that, we will eventually make our way to Australia Day, which that month culminates in. But for those who aren't aware of Australia Month, it was an initiative that kicked off in late 2023, as far as I could see. There were some social media accounts back then promoting it. May have been, I don't want to give incorrect credit here, may have been an initiative of the Dusty Bogan. So if that is in fact the case, well done to you, Mr. Bogan. And if not, apologies for not laying the credit where it's due. But essentially it was this idea of from the 1st of January, which is obviously Federation Day here in Australia, all the way up to the 26th of January. Let's make this a real celebration of Australia, and let's basically just jam social media up with positive representations of Australia, Australiana, significant days of history that maybe are occurring on those dates throughout the month of January, or really anything that you just want to post, even if it's another historical date that is you're particularly fond of. Let's just fill January 1st to January 26th with positive Australian content in the lead up to Australia Day. Thomas, I know you said you're not an avid user of social media, but you have seen some bits and pieces of this. What have been your impressions of this campaign this year and if relevant, the years leading up?
Yeah, so obviously this is a partially reactionary thing that we're doing here. Lots of civilizational enemies, like claiming full months of the year. So are we. And what better month is there to claim than the one that contains both Australia Day and Federation Day? And you're right, I don't go on social media very often, but I have seen a few of the recent things that ANA have been making, and very high quality. We are getting some people in the association now who are quite talented when it comes to creation of media, so we can look forward to a lot more of that into the future.
Very good. Yeah, and that was a point that I didn't make at the time, that, yes, we as an association obviously have jumped on the bandwagon with this as well, and we've been going very hard. So please check out our social media channels for some of that content, because it has been fantastic, as you mentioned, some really great contributors there. Tom, have you seen much, not just in terms of what we've been doing as an association, but what's been going on more broadly with some of this Australia Month content and commentary?
Yeah, I can definitely say there's a lot of chatter on Twitter about, and maybe not Australia Month specifically. A lot of it's on Australia Day, but so many people in our sphere are great with either media or just tweets and updates that it all seems to almost come out of nowhere. Then you see so many people.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having to think about this earlier today, and then only this evening before we jumped on, I revisited the Oz Natives website and an article written by National Governor Matt Grant on entitled "Cultural Struggle for Australia Month." And as I was reading it, I was thinking, these ideas that I thought were my own, had I actually subconsciously stolen this from the last time I read this article? Because as I was reading it, I thought, that's right, I've actually read this already, and maybe my thoughts aren't as original as what I thought. But what I like about Australia Month as an initiative, and the idea of just sending lots and lots of positive Australian content people's way, is that I think too often we define ourselves and what we do as nativists or nationalists in terms of what we're not, of what we stand against. You know, we don't want our demographic makeup to dramatically shift to the point that we're unrecognisable. But by doing that, we lose sight of, well, okay, we don't want to be unrecognisable, but what do we recognise ourselves as? There's not enough in the way of positive content and positive identity, rather than saying this is not who we are, or this is not who we want to be. This is who we are. This is who we want to be. This is who we're proud to be. Without that as a foundation, any kind of attempt at resistance against that sort of really unwanted change, it's just not going to hold up. It's not going to have the foundation that it needs to succeed. And this is something that that I think Matt Grant touched on in this article, and it's great to see, and great to see the positive response. You know, our content, I think, has been engaged with really well, but we've also been able to reshare or share and reshare the content of some other really talented content creators out there that are jumping on with Australia Month as well, and the uptake seems to be pretty significant. So I think it's been a really positive thing, and we want to see more of that. We want to see more of, let's define who we are, what we stand for, what we're about in terms of our culture and our heritage and our identity, rather than just saying what we don't want. Okay, so Australia Month obviously kicks off with the 1st of January, Federation Day. This is something that in Victoria, certainly in our branch, we've made a bit of a concerted effort to acknowledge in recent years, because it is, well, I'll talk a little bit about where it is in terms of days of significance later. I'll open up that as a discussion point in a moment. But in terms of the day itself and some of what's been done to acknowledge that, Thomas, you've been involved in some of this effort to drive a more concerted effort to focus on Federation Day and make a point of Federation Day. What has the Victorian branch been doing as part of that?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a tough date, really, because there's a few different reasons. You know, it's very similar to Australia Day and very close on the calendar. It's when you combine that with the holidays that people take over that period, as well as the revelries and festivities on the 31st of December, it's not really well observed anymore. But it is a very important day in Australian history and worth commemorating, because it's the beginning of our state. You know, we aren't merely a colony of either the British Empire or some broader white race. We're our own people, history, culture, and government. And obviously, when we talk about the government, we're talking about back when the government wasn't such a dirty word. So we can certainly look forward into the future about having a wonderful government, again, that represents us, looks after our interests, and venerates the past.
Absolutely. Tom, is it something that the Sydney branch has given much attention to? I know you are a very young branch, still finding your feet, but at the same time doing some great work. We're actually going to have the chance to hopefully dedicate a whole podcast to the establishment and launch of the Sydney branch shortly, so we'll look forward to that. But in the time that you have been up and running, is Federation Day something that you guys have had the opportunity to pay much attention to?
No, unfortunately, we haven't managed to dedicate any specific events to Federation Day. We all gathered on Australia Day, but Federation Day sort of we were talking within ourselves about it, and everyone shared some great pictures of the Federation and everyone all gathered together, but nothing specifically about it. But we're definitely planning on having more of an effort next year when we're more established as a branch.
Yeah, well, Melbourne, from what I understand, was sort of the heart of the Federation movement. But in terms of the celebrations that actually took place on the 1st of Jan, that was all Sydney. Melbourne kind of saved her big event for May the 9th and the opening of Parliament. So, I reckon Sydney branch needs to resurrect the march to Centennial Park. But, I think it is a hugely significant day on the calendar, and this might be a controversial thing to say, but I think those responsible for picking the day, and I believe that it mostly was the decision of the 6 premiers at the time. I did see someone on social media trying to pin the blame on Alfred Deakin. I thought, I'm not sure that's right. I wouldn't want to tarnish Alfred Deakin's good name with that. But I have to say that I don't think the choice of date, as much as the symbolism of a new day, a new year in a new century for a new nation, there is something that sounds nice about that. I just think practically it does present a lot of challenges over that Christmas and New Year period. So it is a little bit of a shame that acknowledging it and properly acknowledging it around that period and all those other events that are going on can be really difficult, because it is, as Thomas said, it's the day that we formally became a people that said we are a people, a separate people and a distinct people. Yes, one that has grown out of the British people, and which still has close ties at that stage. Loyalism to the empire was still very, very strong, but we are distinct enough now. We've been transformed by this landscape enough now to recognise ourselves as something different.
Yeah, we're not going to change the culture very quickly, but ANA is seeking to change within our association the perception of the 1st of January and what the date actually means in a nativist context. But obviously we've got to be realistic, so we do keep things pretty low-key. We mostly talked, we sang some songs, had a few little speeches and things like that, but yeah, pretty low-key, so don't be scared of coming.
Yep, very good. So we have Federation Day at the start of Australia Month, and it's almost like there's this reverse symbolism going on. Well, that's probably not really clear what I'm saying there. If the dates were reversed and it was the 1st of January was the day that we landed on Australian soil, or the first fleet landed on Australian soil for the first time, and January 26th was the day that we federated, that would just be absolutely beautiful symbolism throughout Australia Month. It's like the road to nationhood, from the moment of landing to the moment of actually formalising that through federation. Unfortunately, it's the reverse of that. So it's like we're walking that road in reverse. But we walk that road in reverse, and we get to Australia Day on the 26th of January. And we know all about the attacks on Australia Day that have really intensified, or had really intensified, over the last 10 years or so. And in a way, in certain respects, grow more intense still. I think the vandalism, the attacks on monuments of cultural significance in the lead up to Australia Day are arguably as bad as they've ever been. But I think we've started to see something shift in the wider narrative around Australia Day. I first really noticed it last year, and I think it's probably gone to another level in that we're seeing the day becoming again more openly embraced by the wider Australian public. What's your view on this, Thomas? Do you think things are starting to change?
Well, I was reading an article on this very recently, The Conversation published an article on it, and the data over the last few years seems to indicate that positions are hardening. There aren't more people necessarily who are more pro-Australia Day, but people are more vehemently pro-Australia Day. Instead of saying, oh, I support Australia Day, but, I'll go without wearing an Australian flag cape or go without the family barbecue, people are more likely to just go ahead and do it. And then, of course, you have people becoming a bit more rabidly anti-Australia Day at the same time. So the left globally does appear to be in a little bit of a state of demoralization as a result of this Trump thing. So maybe that's having some sort of effect. But we can be pretty happy that Australians are not declining any further in terms of our abandonment of Australia Day and how important that is to us as well.
Tom, what is your sense of this around Sydney? And obviously, not just talking to people that are already of our worldview, but because that's not really going to be relevant to how things are changing, those that already have these firmly entrenched views. But conversations with people outside that sphere around Sydney, are you sensing any kind of shift? Or do you attribute it more to a hardening of position as well?
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit of both, but I've definitely seen a lot more Australian flags out in the open, draped on the side of houses. And there was a ute I saw drive past with a giant one being dragged and 3 young guys in the front. So it's people that we don't know are out there really getting into it. Whether that's they've already had this position and they feel like they can open up more about it, or they've only just realised that Australia needs defending, but it's a lot more public. And similarly, the attacks are a lot more public and brazen.
Yeah, things like nationalism and whatnot only really exist initially in a context of attack. Otherwise, you're kind of just people existing. There isn't really a strong need for a reaction unless there is an attack. So it does make sense that people are becoming more Australian as it becomes under attack.
Yeah, I'm certainly seeing and hearing more and more people, and whether it is that this is a shift in their opinion, or they're simply feeling more emboldened now because they've seen others quite publicly putting forward a pro-Australia Day message. I'm certainly encountering more and more people from outside the nationalist and nativist spheres, ordinary Aussies, shall we call them, that are more openly acknowledging Australia Day and embracing Australia Day. But I think there is a little bit of a danger with this as well. Obviously, the big event this year, and we're going to get to that in a second, was the March for Australia rally on Australia Day, and I was there and part of that. But there was a local event on in my local council area later that afternoon when I got home, and I decided to take my kids to that. Now, this is a particularly demographically diverse area, shall we say. But I thought, you know what? I don't really see that there's going to be much there for anyone other than Heritage Australians to get excited about. So, we'll go and we'll have a look and we'll see what's there. Well, what was there was free stuff, which had presumably been advertised in the relevant languages of these different groups, and it was a very un-Australian experience. And within about 5 seconds of arriving, it was pretty clear that this was not something that I wanted to be at, not something that I wanted my family to be at, because it wasn't a representation of Australia, and yet it had been branded as an Australia Day event. This is how we celebrate Australia. So I think we need to be mindful that even if, if it's not simply a hardening of positions, as you said, Thomas, and we can actually be more positive about a wider embrace of Australia Day, we need to be careful and we need to understand what that actually looks like, because my fear is that what that is going to look like is very much like the Australia Day parades of old, before councils initially conveniently used COVID as an excuse to shut them down, and then said, oh, no, we're not bringing them back because they cause too much pain and hurt for First Nations people. I'm worried that we're going to get back to that point where Australia Day is once again just this multicultural jamboree where we talk about what a great multicultural nation Australia is. Multicultural nation, I say with air quotes. So I think we need to be mindful that a more positive representation of Australia Day and a wider embrace of Australia Day, that's probably the direction that it's heading, without some serious effort to prevent that from being the case.
Thank goodness for that.
But obviously, the main event, as I said, the main event that I was involved in, that I attended on Australia Day, was the March for Australia. We were all there, either the three of us, either in Melbourne or in Sydney. I might start with you, Thomas, and I'll leave this question as open as possible to start. What did you make of the event? From what I understand, it was your first one, so you don't have a point of comparison from your own experience at earlier events. But what did you make of the March for Australia event in Melbourne?
Yeah, not the first rally I've been to, but first March for Australia, and it was a bit chaotic. Yeah, so there was a lot of high energy young men, and that's always a good thing. And even though there was a conspicuous absence of another group who, were defending, quote unquote, the rally the previous occasions, on this occasion, there was no need for that. There were no incidents. The police had things pretty well under control. And even when maybe they didn't, there was still a suitable reaction from the crowd. So things went fairly well. The numbers were not particularly high in Melbourne, although not nearly as low as the media would have you think. So I think it went okay overall. We can do a lot better in the future, however.
Well, I might come back to that point. Tom, I'll get your perspective on Sydney first. Do you have that point of comparison? Did you attend any of the previous events? And if so, you might be able to fill us in on how it compared. But generally, just an overview of the day in Sydney and how it went.
Yeah, definitely. I attended the first March for Australia, and I suppose in comparison, they feel kind of similar. This one, and there were a lot more people dressed up with the Australian flags out, and numbers-wise felt pretty similar. I overheard a journalist talking to another one. They said, they reckon there's 1,000 or 2,000 people here, whether that was correct, but it was definitely felt like a lot. Just because of last time I was there, no one could really hear the speeches, so I didn't stick around for those, unfortunately, this time. But we didn't have any similar issues with fights or anything. There was that one arrest, but I think everyone knows about that. And unfortunate, but something's always going to happen.
Yeah, no doubt. You can't control the actions of every individual that's involved, and unfortunately, if some of the messaging that comes through from that is not what you want to be reflective of the rally as a whole, that the media is going to pick that up and run with it, as they have. But those sorts of things, I think you just have to take on the chin.
Also, this is a nationalist event, and you must expect that nationalists will go there of varying stripes and extremities. So, obviously arresting someone is for what they're saying is it's just become common now. The government is very happy to arrest people, for saying things. So
Well,
it's odd that we've become sort of accustomed to them just doing that.
no doubt.
Sense?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I think a lot of the messaging from within our circles has been, not a great thing to do. But when you, given the situation, not a particularly wise move. But when you
not the ANA way, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
I was saying it's shameful that we're in this position that we have to be so careful about everything that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, and you're right. It has been normalised, even for us, to the extent that our first reaction is, he probably shouldn't have said that. That was a pretty unwise thing to do, and don't know what he thought was going to happen. Rather than, isn't it crazy that this guy just got arrested for that? Which it obviously is. But something you said then, though, I thought was worth focusing on. You said, well, obviously this is a nationalist event. Well, is it? And I asked that as a genuine question. Do you think? Because I don't have that point of comparison either with the first event, which I didn't attend. But regardless of how much the crowd was down, it was still a significant crowd in Melbourne, and the first event, by all accounts, was significantly larger. Is this an out and out nationalist crowd? Or are we starting to see people drawn into this movement that aren't necessarily nationalists, but are starting to recognise that the path that this country is going down, with its attack on Australian values and commitment to mass, largely third world migration, is a recipe for disaster. And these are people that are effectively taking those first steps towards nationalism, perhaps without actually being nationalists or nativists. What's your sense on the makeup of this crowd, Thomas, considering you have been to other rallies and you can compare this crowd with other crowds?
Certainly can. So there's you raised a lot of good points there, and one of them was that how many of these people in the crowd are nationalists. So as time goes on, if a rally shrinks in terms of how many people are there, the radical proportion, the firm nationalist proportion, the firm leftist proportion of the crowd tends to become higher. So if there's a rally with 10,000 people, let's say hypothetically 1,000 are radicals. Let's say there's a crowd of 5,000 people, let's say 800 are radicals. So a higher proportion of radicals are in attendance typically when a rally is smaller. That's just because radical people tend to go to rallies more often, and also they tend to be willing to go to more rallies and be more willing to sacrifice time on their weekend instead of mowing the lawn or spending it with their family, risking that they might be assaulted by some leftist degenerate, which is always a risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, what's your sense on Sydney? Have you been involved in similar kind of events that are rallies that are within that nationalist sphere previously, and have you sensed anything different or similar about the makeup of the crowds?
No, I've only gone to the previous March for Australia, and before that, not really any rallies. And I sort of went because I knew that there were going to definitely be radicals, as everyone can guess that. But there was I'd guess maybe half of the people there, or maybe around that, were what you would call like an Australian nationalist. And then a decent proportion would also be the One Nation crowd that sort of overlaps, but a lot of older people that just love Pauline, and then other people sort of COVID people ones. So a couple of different groups, all maybe around nationalism, but some of them for different reasons and different levels of extreme and what they would be willing to put up with.
Yeah, indeed. I heard someone on the train on the way in say that the problem with these immigrants is they're not contributing anything. Not like us Italians. When we came to Australia, there was nothing here. There was no roads, there was no infrastructure, there was no snowy river hydro, there was nothing here. We built all of it. So really, we're the real Australians. And these modern immigrants, they aren't contributing anything, which of course I had to avoid just laughing at when I heard it, because as we know as nativists, obviously Australia was a very well established country that was much more cohesive and a much more serious country in 1945 than it was in 1990 or today. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that raises some other questions then. What do we, not that we're necessarily driving this, but at least not exclusively, but what do we, whether it's we as an organisation or nationalists generally, what should we want to see at events like this? Do we want a large crowd like that with messaging? And I think speeches that can't really be heard all that clearly plays a role in this, with messaging that is maybe a little bit hazy, just hazy enough for people to possibly get dragged along or get pulled into it, not 100% sure of what they're committing to, not 100% sure, for instance, that, hey, what you're marching for here is a white Australia, or do we want more explicit messaging and a probably more or less of a strong showing? Because to come to something like that, well, one, that's initially going to turn certain people off, where they're going to say, oh, no, I'm not about that. I'm just, about attracting the right immigrants and making sure that we don't have too many. It's not about where they're coming from. Or, turning people off that maybe secretly are of our worldview, but aren't prepared to publicly be seen at an out-and-out nationalist rally, knowing that they could potentially have their photo taken there, have their identity revealed, and they've really got nothing to hide behind other than coming clean and saying, "Yeah, look, I basically want to live in a white Australia." What do we want to see from events like this in that sense?
I think that's likely to cause some controversy. People will have some varying views on this within our association, even, because it all depends on what you want to achieve and how you want to get there and what you think will be more effective. And this is like a very heavily opinion-based question. So personally, I'm a strong believer, and I don't know what you call it, something like the total political system. I think there should be a full range of different activities, sectors, media interpretations of various different things, as long as they're all pro-Australian. If you can sort of keep everyone on the right direction and in the right trajectory, then that total system will bring everyone around to where you want eventually. The problem with being too radical is that you do exactly as you're suggesting, you turn a lot of people off. It's not necessarily just because they're lame, they're gay, they're filthy moderates or whatever. A lot of people are like that, and a lot of people aren't like that. A lot of people can be brought around, certainly to become allies. Because when you have a think about the real hard edge tends not to be very successful, except in situations of great difficulty. And Australia, all of its problems, is not really in a situation of great difficulty. We're in a very comfortable position. And comfortable positions are won still, to some extent, by the marketplace of ideas and whoever's better run. Because, if you're in a well-run association and organization and community and whatnot, you will vastly outperform anyone else. Think of all these small immigrant groups who are really just giving us a run for our money in Australia, because Australians are terrible at being collective. There are a few Australian groups that are trying to represent us at the moment, such as ourselves in the BAC, who are, trying our best. But considering the amount of Australians and how much power Australians have in this country, we're still punching well below our weight.
Well said. Tom, anything you want to weigh in with on this point?
Yeah, I would like to say that I feel like, and it is a sort of debate within the spheres, is how broad do you want to go big tenting at everyone, or purity spiral and only have the true believers? But I think that stopping mass migration, that's not what the end goal is, but I think that's broad enough, and there's enough people that believe it. Like, you see the polling, and it's over 50% of the country want to stop migration, and a lot of them really want to stop it, and a lot want to send them back. That's almost a tent that's what the March for Australia was built on, was it doesn't really matter why we're here, this is what we're doing. And I feel like if you have a good enough top-down movement saying, just stick to this message, no foreign flags, no different ideas, we're just here to tell the government that we don't want mass migration, then that's specific enough that you're not going to get you hopefully won't get people that are off message, but it's broad enough that you're going to get enough people that it's noticed.
Well, that leads nicely into what I wanted to say next, Tom, because you talk about not being off message. I felt like the message was probably, it's not off message wouldn't be quite right, but I felt like it was a bit broader in scope, because obviously there was the anti-mass migration message still, but it was also paired with this pro-Australia and pro-Australian identity in the face of these relentless attacks on Australian identity. And I think that element of it was tried to, or the organisers tried to emphasise that a little bit more because of the fact that it was Australia Day. And we've seen a few different reactions to the fact that the rally took place on Australia Day from within the wider nationalist circle. Some thinking that Australia Day being our most significant day, that's the day when you have to stand up and fight for your country. Some suggesting that Australia Day, well, this is a day that we want to be celebrating. We want to be celebrating Australian identity and culture and who we are, and not focusing on that negative mindset of what we're against, which we touched on earlier, and that that kind of protesting and that kind of opposition to mass migration is best removed from a day like Australia Day. Thomas, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'm not actually 100% sure, but going by my totality theory, I think that there's really space for both of them. People are going to be interested in having a march, and people are going to be interested in having a celebration. Celebrations are very popular around Australia. We had several members in Melbourne, for example, who attended the march and rally because that's what they think is important, and you had others who spent it with their family because that's what they think is important. So trying to capture everything, as long as it's within that Australian lens and frame, is beneficial if you can swing it.
Yeah, fair enough. Tom, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's definitely a good point that I hadn't even really considered, because I sort of view being Australian and supporting Australia and anti-mass migration as almost the same thing, whereas one feeding the other. But it is and if you wanted to stay home with your family or you want to have a barbecue with friends, that's going to often be viewed more important than going out and having a political rally. So it's sort of a tough thing. I do think that having the march on Australia Day was a good idea. I mean, everyone's got the day off at least.
Yeah, it didn't seem to pay off. I'm not 100% sure why. I'm not on social media, but you can't really say, it's because it wasn't very well organised or whatever, because typically the people who are attending don't really know about if something's going to be well organised or not. The first March for Australia wasn't particularly well organised either. But a large amount of people came trying to express frustration and opposition to what the government's been doing recently. And yeah, not 100% sure why people aren't coming, because I tend to know more radical people. And as mentioned before, more radical people tend to keep going to these rallies because they view this sort of thing as being very important.
Yeah. Well, good points. Good discussion on that particular point. For what it's worth, I'm really torn on this particular one. I went on the weekend, on Australia Day, as I said, and I was glad that I was there, I felt that I was doing something meaningful, and the fact that was happening on Australia Day was significant. But there was a part of me that thought, I really would like to be celebrating and be, a bit more relaxed. And I didn't really think that there was, any great threat of danger. You always have to be prepared for nefarious actors looking to infiltrate or cause a bit of a skirmish. But I didn't really think there was any risk of that. But at certain times, you do get a little bit apprehensive. And you're thinking, this is not what you envision as for your National Day. This is not what you want it to be about in an ideal world. I suppose the flip side to that is, well, we're living in far from an ideal world. And if you want to have that Australia Day where you're sitting back and enjoying a barbecue with your friends and family and don't have a care in the world, well, maybe this particular Australia Day is the day that you have to come out and give that up.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to be in my farm in Dalmatia somewhere farming cabbages, but we're not at that point. We need to fight. We need to stand up for our people, our country, our traditions. And if you are at home with your family, you are politically invisible. You might think that's still worth doing, and fair enough. It's a social occasion, it's a cultural occasion, but when there are rallies and things like this, if you don't attend, you're invisible, and the government can and will ignore you.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing I wanted to add on Australia Day before I move on to, I know we wanted to talk about the hate speech laws, because obviously they had an impact on the rally in terms of who was present, or at least who made their presence felt. But just one final point on Australia Day that I forgot to touch on. Yes, we are seeing this wider embrace of the day. One thing that I am not convinced that we're seeing, and I think there are some recent statistics to back this up. Admittedly, these statistics are a few years old now, and they predate the more positive shift in mindset that some of these polls are reflecting. But one thing I don't really sense is that we have enough of an understanding or enough of an appreciation of what Australia Day is actually commemorating. Yes, we're embracing it because it is our national day, but if you turned around and said that our national day was the 3rd of March, because that was the day that the Australia Act 1986 was ratified, then people would say, yeah, that's fine, let's make it that one. Or if you said that it was the anniversary of the Eureka Stockade, that's probably not a good example, because that hasn't been seriously floated as an alternative for a while. People say, yeah, whatever, as long as we've got our national day and we can celebrate Australia and being Australian, then I'm happy with that. But I think there's something really, really significant in the 26th of January 1788. It's not just about having any old national day. It's about what that day represents. What do we think about this? Thomas, do you sense that there is much in the way of an appreciation of the events of the 26th of January and why they're significant? I've got my thoughts on why they're so significant and why it is a fitting national day, but what's your sense on this?
Oh, look, I mean, people have some awareness of Australia Day and its significance. People have almost no awareness of it about any other dates. It's one of the reasons why we need to defend Australia Day so much, because they'll just pick some lame duck day that doesn't mean anything to anyone and people just won't celebrate it. Australia Day was popularized back when we actually were a country, and we aren't a real nation anymore, not a nation state anyway, and a very weak nation people. So if we pick some lame duck date, then the celebration will pretty much just completely disappear. That said, that doesn't mean that we, as nativists and nationalists in general, would be stopped from celebrating it on Australia Day. I don't think people would stop celebrating it necessarily just because something has been made illegal or no longer the official day doesn't mean that it's just going to disappear entirely. So it wouldn't necessarily be a disaster. It could possibly even be a good thing, but I think the accelerationist idea has been repeatedly proven to be inaccurate, regardless of whether you think it's a nice idea or not, that if things just get bad enough, people will somehow just wake up when, the experience has proven pretty much the exact opposite. People just acclimatize to it. I think Australia Day is still worth defending on a national pride basis. And if we are successful in defending it, that's a huge win. We have to take wins.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm probably trying to make a slightly different point. I'll get to that in a moment. But look, the point that you make is well made. Tom, what's your thoughts on the 26th of January and not just the public attachment or positive sentiment toward that date, but what the date actually signifies? Do you think there is attached to that embrace of the date where it exists? And as I said, I think there's good evidence that it is on the increase. Do you think attached to that is a real a real understanding of the significance of the day itself?
I think there is. I mean, maybe not everyone knows the specific historical events that happened on that day. They might just think that 26th of January was when Australia started. And they're pretty much correct. So that's not when the first fleet arrived at Australia, and that's not when we discovered Australia. But that's when the colony started, and that's when Australia started. So even if they don't know that that's specifically what happened, I feel like then if you change it to another date, the anniversary of the Australia Act, or the meme answer, which I hate, of May 8 because it's mate, it's just going to be synthetic. And I feel like it's like moving the hottest 100.
Yeah. Look, I agree with that. What I said before was probably a little bit misleading. I think this push from a few years ago, where they started throwing out dates like the 3rd of March for the Australia Act, or the day that the Queen gave royal assent, which they would only choose because they'd say, oh, well, no one's going to want Federation Day, which is the actual date of significance attached to that, because it's already a public holiday and they're all going to be hungover from New Year's Day anyway, from New Year's Eve anyway. I think that push itself is losing momentum, and I do think that there is. I think there is an attachment to the 26th of January that goes beyond simply saying we don't feel that we need to change it. I think that there would be public resistance to it, but I'm not sure how much of that public resistance would be it's because the 26th of January is really significant. I get the sense that some of that might be, well, no, we don't want it to move because the 26th of January is when it's always been, and we don't want to be told what to do, and it's going to stay on the 26th of January, rather than understanding, well, this is the day that Arthur Phillip stepped ashore and planted the flag at Sydney Cove. And for me, that part is really significant because you said it then, Tom, that is when Australia started, not in a formal sense, but that's like the conception of the Australian people for me. If I may put it in these somewhat graphic terms, that the birth is federation, right? That's actually coming out into the world, but the conception is European man, or specifically the people of England and the wider UK setting foot on Australian soil. That's the moment of conception, because nationhood is that synthesis of race and place, and that is the moment where it happens. Now, the full effects of that aren't properly understood at that time. Those people, they don't feel that they're Australian. They feel like they're Brits or Irish
Yeah.
in this God-forsaken land across the other side of the world where
If
nothing will grow and the wood is terrible. But
if you put
that
them
is
on a boat and sent them straight back to England or Ireland, they'd go, "Oh, okay, well, I'm back home."
Correct, but that's not what happens, and so it becomes this moment, even if it's only realised, generations after the fact. It becomes this moment of deep significance because it is, well, if it's not the birth of a nation, and I think it's fair to call federation the birth of a nation. If it's not the birth of a nation, it is the conception. So I think there is a message that needs to be projected on that point, and I think we have a role, a really significant role to play in that.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't there this, I've forgotten the exact specifics, but there was this revolt by Irish convicts who wanted to go back to Ireland to fight this continuation of war against the British Empire. So there's certainly this strong connection that people had back to the motherland because the British government was trying to partially disarm Irish republicanism by just deporting them to Australia and making them almost irrelevant. But it's sort of like looking at this this rainbow. When does blue stop being blue and start being red? Can you point to a specific part of the rainbow where it's blue is no longer blue, it's now red? Well, you basically can't do that. But if you're looking at a color, I can say, oh, well, that's blue and that's red. So when did Australians become Australians? That's a difficult question to ask. We do have dates which help, but in a sense, some of us in the Australian Native Association today are more Australian than some people were in Australia in 1901, just because of how incredibly loyalist many of them were still towards the British Empire and still viewed themselves as being basically British people who lived in Australia and just happened to be representing Australian interests pretty much because it was an extension of the British Empire, whereas we view Australia as being its own valuable thing by itself.
Yeah, and I think some of the arguments that sometimes get put forward, get advanced around that point that our federation wasn't particularly significant in terms of Australian identity because the amount of British loyalism that still existed at that particular point.
But also, it wasn't that significant in the sense that it was representing something that was already growing, was already significant. There was no reason for federation to have happened if everyone was so completely loyalist that they were completely happy with the British government doing whatever they wanted with the place.
Exactly right. And that is the point that I was very slowly fumbling and bumbling my way towards, that it is on that spectrum that you talk about. It's maybe not a definite demarcation, but it's a significant milestone along the way. And read The Sentimental Nation, listeners, if you haven't already, because the great John Hirst makes this exact point. Federation did not have to happen for practical reasons. It certainly made things easier in terms of intercolonial travel and trade and things like this. But self-governing communities do not forego their independence for mere conveniences, was I think the terminology that he used. So. Yes, which suggests that Australia federated because it believed itself to be a nation. How did that happen? It happened because a bunch of convicts set foot on Australian soil back in 1788. So that's why I'm particularly passionate about advocating and for not just advocating for January 26th, but the telling the story of the history behind that date. Tom, I kind of cut you out of the conversation for a while there. My apologies. Have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I'd like to add that. I suppose it's something that I don't think about too much. But if someone doesn't want to change Australia Day from the 26th just because they don't like change, that's not as good as knowing what it means. But in a democratic sense, it almost is. Like, they believe the right things already. They'll learn. It's fine. if there's enough people out celebrating Australia Day on the 26th just because it's Australia Day, I don't want to change it, then that's good. We're not changing it. They can learn what it actually means, and that's why you have the big Australia events on those days to celebrate.
That's a part of the totality I was talking about before, because you've got people like that who just aren't political, aren't ideological, don't really know what's going on. That's fine. It is what it is. You can't be upset about it. It just is what it is. So if you've got people who just don't want to change the date because they like the date and they like Australia well enough, then that's fine, really.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's just, no, there's no resentment or animosity towards these people. I'm thrilled that they don't want to change the date just because they don't want to be told what to do. Good on them. But while they're there not wanting to change the date, I think there is a role that we can play in promoting that messaging. And this is why the date is significant. And because when we do that, we build a sense of what Australian identity actually is, and that feeds some of our other messaging and some of the other things that we're campaigning for as well. So the final point that I wanted to move on to, because it obviously ties in to the March for Australia and the fact that, things were a little bit different this time around. One group in particular, because of these laws, had no official presence at all, which made for a very different event. But we need to be mindful as well about the broader impacts that this legislation can have on the nationalist scene, the broader nationalist scene. And so I just wanted to throw it open to you guys. I'm by no means, not only by no means an expert in this area, I haven't even really looked at the legislation in any level of depth at all. So most of the commentary and most of the understanding of it that I would have to offer would be regurgitating what I've heard other people say about it in passing. I know within the organisation there are members that are quite concerned about it. From the little that I know about it, I'm probably less concerned than some of those. I'm not particularly worried about us as concerning as the legislation itself is. I don't know that it will necessarily have much of a direct impact on us if we continue to do as we're doing. I'll start with you, Thomas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, as you pretty much said, I'm not fully across legislation or anything like that, but I do trust the lawyers and lawmen within our association who have gone through it, and they say that, sure, while this is a concerning trend, it's not a particularly good piece of legislation. It may well be overturned. But in the meantime, ANA, as long as we stick to our codes of conduct and our manner of speaking publicly and whatnot, we shouldn't be fearful of this legislation. We are going along just as we always were because we aren't, needlessly combative. We don't attack people or defame people, so shouldn't really affect us very much.
Tom, any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, pretty similar, where a lot of the laws from what I've seen, other than the gun laws, but it's what we had but worse. I don't know how many new things were added, but the additions and the changes, we were always above board with what we did anyway. So I think we're in the clear with that. But the open question is how the law is going to be applied, not really what it is. So if it's going to be hit by the High Court or if it's going to sail through and not be used for a while, who's the first person that's going to be affected?
Yeah, that's right. Nobody wants to be the test case, and again,
I think we have a few people lining up for that already.
Yeah,
and they aren't going after ANA first.
You're right. They're probably not. The only point that I wanted to add on to that is, look, there are, as I said, people that know more about this that are saying yes, the laws are badly written, may very well not stack up constitutionally. I can not weigh into that at all. I just don't know if that's the case. That feels right based on some of what I'm hearing. It seems crazy that some of this was allowed to pass, and so I do wonder if it will stack up if it's tested in court. But that's not a reason to get complacent, because as has been stated by others before who have been dragged through the courts only to come out with a Pyrrhic victory on the other side after reputational damage and having to pay hefty legal expenses and endure the emotional toll of that experience. The process is the punishment. So you might find yourself dragged through the courts, and as a result of that, the legislation comes crumbling down because, yes, what they tried to get you with was not actually legally sound, but regardless, you probably don't want to be the person that brings that undone by having to endure that process. So, like I said, I don't really think it's particularly relevant to what we do in the ANA. I don't think that that's going to happen, but for those within the nationalist and nativist sphere more broadly, I think that's just something worth keeping in mind.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the other effects of it are, I think, going to be different than the specific law. People are just scared of doing things because they're worried of being arrested.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of this is, isn't it? It's not necessarily about having an airtight legislation that you know that you can get someone the second that they open their mouth on a particular point. It's about being the deterrent, isn't it? So, you just have to stay the course and make sure you're not slipping off into that particular possibly questionable territory. That's just about a wrap on this one, guys. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, nothing other than apologies for being a bit low energy today. I have been thoroughly affected by this heat, so...
It does get you. There is a reason that the Australian Gothic emerged as a distinctive literary subgenre where the malevolent force was not some monster, but was actually the environment itself. Because Australia, as much as we love our wide brown land, she can be an unforgiving place sometimes as far as the weather goes. So no worries at all.
I don't see the romance in a 40-degree day. I can tell you that much.
Well, a few of our guys do, based on some of the discussions we were having today, apparently. So good on them. But no, Tom, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks for having me on. It was great to chat. I don't think I'm as affected by the heat, but I don't know how much hotter it is here, or maybe had more aircon and more beer.
Very good. That's the way to deal with it.
No aircon and no beer, so maybe that's not possible.
Oh, well, you know what you need to do to sort yourself out then. All right, gentlemen, thank you for your time. A real pleasure chatting with both of you. You have been listening to the Natives Rouseabout podcast. A reminder that you can check us out at oznatives.org or follow us on social media on X, Telegram, and what's that other one? Instagram, that's what it's called. I'm not really much of a social media user myself, but rest assured that the guys there do very good work indeed. So make sure you give them a follow if you are on the socials, and make sure that you leave in the comments section on YouTube any questions you have for our next episode of the podcast, and we'll make sure that we get to those and answer those for you. Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Thank you.
If ever it were time for the dead to rise, then surely their time is now. From the lee wind's cliffs to the roar of Sydney's side, from Wyndham to the High. call up your many dead, your Kelly and your Lalor and the shirted men they led. Call up your Brave, your Stewart, your Wentworth, your Benelong, your men who dared usher me with its bitter slavish wrong. Call up your Quieten singers from the silence of the grave, who sang your latent spirit to the complaining wave. Call up your myths and your legends, your men of song and tale, men from the snowy, the center and lakes where bunyips wail. Your seekers, your finders, your fighters, your men who with Clancy ride. Lawson's men from the western creeks and 1,000 more beside. Call up your ghosts, Australia, and set them riding far to rouse a sleeping nation to its 7-pointed star. Call up your dead Australians and bid them ride with you to set your rivers brimming with Eureka's blood anew. When the day is over, whether to shout or to weep, keep ever your dead alive in you. Oh, never let them sleep. For the nation that forgets its dead, that lets its heroes lie, dust deep in its mind forever, is surely ripe to die. And only those go on in glory their story to make, whoever keep their dead alive and their songs and heroes away. Now is the time for the nation's urgent dead to ride, so set them riding here and now. From the Lee Wind's cliffs to the roar of Sydney side, from Wyndham to the For the nation that forgets its dead, that lets its heroes lie, dust deep in its mind forever, surely ripe to nation that forgets its dead, that lets its heroes lie, dust deep in its mind forever, is sure